Well, good evening. What a wonderful privilege and blessing to be gathered like this on another evening for revivals. Thank you for that special singing. I always enjoy singing, and it's nice to hear a group come up front and sing like that. Also appreciate the theme song we've been singing. We each should have a deep desire to become like Christ, and yet it cannot be done on our own strength. His power can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul, and you will see 'twas best for him to have his way with thee. So many times we want to do better, and that's a wonderful thing, and yet it's not on our own strength. His way is best, and as committed followers of Jesus, we need to be living surrendered lives. That's what it comes down to. Now, as I observe our conservative Anabaptist churches, one of my deep desires for our churches is that we would be intentional in the way that we live. We have been so blessed, so tremendously blessed. We live lives of ease compared to many, many people in our world today, and even compared to our ancestors. We're living in a time of many blessings. We don't know what war is like. We've never experienced something like that here. We don't know what the Great Depression is like. We haven't lived through that. We receive little to no persecution for being a follower of Jesus, relative to many other places in the world. And all of this can breed this, what I would call maybe a ho-hum attitude towards life. We're just going along, things are going well. And yet the decisions we make in life are so important. Each time we make a decision, it falls on a continuum, okay? We have sin or wrong over here. You maybe have the mediocre here. And you have what's good and best on this side. And somewhere the decisions you make fall on that continuum somewhere. And too many times, we're okay with settling somewhere for the mediocre. It's okay, as long as it doesn't fall in this category over here of sin evil, I'm okay. It's not wrong. We ask the question of what is wrong with it instead of asking the question, what is right with it? And there's a distinct difference between those two questions. While some decisions are not necessarily right or wrong, we need to begin evaluating our choices, whether they are taking us closer to our goal of becoming like Christ. Just because something is wrong, or just because something is okay, we should say, doesn't mean it's right for me, or I should be doing it. 1 Corinthians 10:23, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. And so what he's getting at there is all things are lawful. There's things that are all okay. They fit between the mediocre and what's good and best. And yet, what's mediocre doesn't push me towards the goal. It doesn't push my children towards the goal. It doesn't push my church towards the goal of becoming like Christ. Our decisions have far-reaching impacts. They don't simply affect us. They affect our families, they affect our church, they affect those closest to us. And this evening I'd like to share a message that I have shared before, actually many times. I've had a number of requests to share this exact message, and I've pondered why there have been so many requests to hear a message like this. And I believe one reason is that it is something that most, if not all of us, deal with. We struggle with, we face it, we have to wrestle with it. It's something that each one of us can struggle with internally, or people don't see it on the outside, and we can kind of go through life, and it may remain hidden to those on the outside. I've entitled the message this evening, YouTube and the Church. And I'd like to look at 3 points this evening. A history. How did we get here? Effects of YouTube on the church, And then what does it mean to remain faithful as a church? I'd like to talk a little bit about history. How did we get here? If we talk about technology, it is a very broad subject and it has many different facets. And many times when we talk, if I say the word technology, where our minds go is usually the most recent or up-to-date consumer electronic device, whether that's a smartphone, whether that's the latest smartwatch or some type of earbuds or what have you, something along those lines, those consumer electronic devices. And if we look at that segment of technology, much of what that's used for is for communication. So whether we're talking on the phone, whether we're sending an email, surfing the web, updating our social media status, watching a YouTube video, we are communicating. Information's flowing from me to someone else, or vice versa. And this ease of communication aids in the development of new technologies. It increases. Things keep going faster, we could say. If we look back at the account in Genesis 11, we realize that there was a group of people that came together in the land of Shinar with a common goal. And that goal was to build a city, it was to build a tower. They were building the Tower of Babel. And so they were successful to a certain point. They came together, they had one language, they were able to communicate, they were able to build, they were able to be successful because of that ability to communicate. And yet, when God looked down and decided to confound their languages, we realized that they eventually gave up that building project and spread out through the earth. And that was God's intent. Now, most of us would agree that things are changing rapidly. Here, some time ago, my children were reading the Little House on the Prairie books. I'm assuming most of you know that series, by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And if you look at Wilder's life, you realize that she lived from 1867 to 1957, 90 years old. And in that time, she went from bouncing over the prairie in a covered wagon drawn by horses to being able to hop on an airplane and fly across the plains. Huge change in transportation. Things are changing rapidly. There's been a lot of change. The World Wide Web was developed by Tim Berners-Lee. He was a British computer programmer back in March 11 of 1989. And so the World Wide Web is technically younger than I am. And it's kind of hard for me to even process or think back, what would the world be like without the World Wide Web? Without these servers interconnected all over the world where we get this big repository of information that everybody is dumping more and more information on. It's just growing and growing. And it is growing rapidly. People all over the world are dumping information online. I read a statistic that stated that since June of 2022, over 500 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. So for the last number of years, YouTube, the amount of video content on YouTube has been growing at a rate of 500 hours per minute. That's just almost a mind-blowing amount of information just flowing into that one video streaming service. And that's just one, right? There are many other video streaming services, and if we jump out of the whole idea of video streaming, we could go into all the other information that's flowing around, from blogs to web articles to pictures to social media. All this information is just flying around. And so as computer systems become more and more powerful, and they can more easily process these large data sets, like much data, this idea of artificial intelligence and machine learning becomes a possibility. And so we hear a lot about that today. These chipsets are becoming better and better at processing this information, and they're able to artificially be intelligent, give a response that makes sense. Yet my question tonight here is all this uptick in communication and sharing of information a good thing? Are we at a better place than they were 50, 100 years ago? Or was life just simpler back then? Are we at a better place? Is this a good thing? If we go back in history, there was a time when communication was very limited. Most verbal communication happened face-to-face. You couldn't just cell phone or or a house phone or something and call somebody. It had to be done face to face. If you wanted to send a message, it went by a herald. We look back at civilizations in the Bible times. These people would go to war. You'd have enemy nations fighting each other. And what happened? Well, a herald ran back from the battlefield to tell the home country what was happening. We see David being sent out to the battlefield to check up on his brothers. That's the way news traveled. It had to be done by person, by a herald. Written communication was critiqued and reviewed before being published. Think back to the time before the printing press. A book represented a person's labor. It was very valuable. You didn't just randomly spew whatever you wanted to out there. And yet today, the cost to publish something is minimal. I could go online and I could put a comment on some web article for free. You could read whatever you want. I could have a social media account and you could read all about me and I could put whatever information I want up there. There's very little accountability to what I'm putting out there. And so today, there is very little restriction on what's published on the World Wide Web. Looking back in history, we compare now to historically how things have been. While the quantity of communication, we could say, was less than today, back then, the quality was better as it was more closely controlled. Now, this is a generalization, I realize that. But when there is so much cost, so much effort, when you have a person sitting down and manually, a scribe, writing something down, you're going to critique it very, very hard. It represents a people's time. It represents money, value. And so all this information with little restriction or accountability can make it hard to know what is truth. What's out there? There's this big sea, this big repository of information, and it's just swirling around. What is actually true? Now, we often like, as people, when things are cut and dry, they're black and white. And so we rewind back in history, and there was a time when the church could say, no TV, and that was the end of the discussion. There was nothing like a smartphone. There was no World Wide Web. That was some of the newest technology out there for communicating, TV. And yet we realize that many times a certain tool or technology is not intrinsically right or wrong, but rather the way in which that technology is used determines whether it is right or wrong. And I realize that's a general statement too, because, you could say, what is right about a nuclear warhead? Well, it's hard to come up with the right. You talk about nuclear power, that's a wonderful thing. You can create lots of energy, that's great. You can power homes. But there are certain things that it's hard to come up with what's right with it. But many times it's the way in which technology is used. And so this reminds me of the example of a donkey cart or an ox cart. And I shared a little bit in one of the messages here about when Angie and I had traveled to Burkina Faso. And so I had talked about how we went there, and as we were there in that sub-Saharan African country, we saw different modes of different modes of transportation, I should say. There were people that would be walking down the road. They'd be carrying their load. Maybe they were moving sticks or something. There were some people that had carts, wheelbarrows. They were pushing this load. They had a wheeled device, and they were moving their load somewhere using this wheeled device. Cart, or like I said, a wheelbarrow. Some were using donkey carts. They'd hook some animal up to this cart. They would load maybe it was what they're trying to sell at the market for that day, and they'd load it up, and they would drive it down the road. And then a rather recent phenomenon when we were there is that there was an influx of these cheap scooters, from some Asian country, I'm sure, but they were buying these little scooters up. And the really interesting thing with this is that there was no real infrastructure to support the scooters. So you had these little gas stations popping up. There were no, I should go back. In Burkina Faso, it wasn't like you had electricity. It wasn't like you had a lot of motor vehicles or anything. Most of it was you were walking or using animal power to do things. And so this was a big change. So there was no gas stations, there was no electricity, there was not much there. So these little gas stations would pop up alongside these roads in different towns and things. And basically a gas station consisted of a person sitting behind a table, and they had maybe 30 or 40 1-liter jugs of gas. And so you would run your little scooter, And you'd pull up to your gas station, you would pay for your 1 liter bottle of gas, you'd dump it in your tank, give the bottle back, and off you'd go again. That's how you filled up your tank with gas. And so it was interesting to see. But while scooters, donkey carts, wheelbarrows, they seem very primitive to us today. We go out there, we hop in a vehicle, and we go flying down the road, and we don't think anything of it. You can't deny the fact that it is a form of technology when compared to simply walking with your load. It was easier. It was more efficient. Things went easier. It went better. So it was a form of technology. I invite you to turn to Exodus 25. Exodus 25, God is telling the children of Israel how the Ark of the Covenant in this case, but also the different articles that go into the tabernacle, were supposed to be designed. And so we're going to look at verses 10 through 14 that talk about the Ark of the Covenant. Exodus 25, verse 10. And they shall make an ark, a shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold. Within and without shalt thou overlay it, and thou shalt make upon it a crown of gold round about. And thou shalt cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in the 4 corners thereof. And 2 rings shall be in the one side of it, and 2 rings in the other side of it. And thou shalt make staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold. And thou shalt put the staves into the rings by the sides of the ark, that the ark may be borne with them. I'll leave off reading there. And so here we see God telling the children of Israel they're supposed to make a box of certain dimensions. They're supposed to overlay it in gold. And this box is supposed to have 4 rings, 1 in each corner. 2 on one side, 2 on the other side. They're supposed to take 2 sticks, cover those in gold. They're supposed to put these sticks through the rings, 1 on each side, so that 4 people, 1 on each corner, could lift the ark and carry it to its next destination, where they were moving. What I find very interesting with this is that God, He created the entire universe, infinite in wisdom, He could have done anything. Told the children of Israel to design the Ark of the Covenant to be transported in this way. Wasn't there an easier way? I mean, at a minimum, God could have said, okay, build this contraption that looks like a wheelbarrow, right? You set the ark on this device, 1 person picks it up, and it rolls to your next location. And you would take the required number of people working from 4 to 1. Or better yet, you could have hooked a donkey up to it and pulled it somewhere. Much easier, much more efficient. And yet you could even take this even farther. And this is where I think I'm just going to take a little bunny trail here. This is what I think is interesting. God could have literally, He spoke the world into existence. He could have spoken the word, and the Ark of the Covenant, the whole tabernacle, could have just picked up and moved to their next destination. He really didn't need to use anyone. And yet that's the way it is for us today. What a wonderful privilege it is to be used by God, to have that opportunity. He doesn't need us, per se, in the sense that, if we weren't there, He would fail somehow. He is self-sufficient. He can do what He chooses. And yet He chooses to work through each one of us to bring about His kingdom of heaven here on earth. And so what an awesome privilege we have. And so here we see God in the design of the Ark of the Covenant requiring people to be involved in transporting it. Now I invite you to turn to 2 Samuel 6, and we'll look at verses 1 through 7. Now this is jumping into Israel's history. Israel had fallen away from the Lord. They were not walking as closely with the Lord as they should have been. And they're battling the Philistines. And as they battle the Philistines, they are fighting some losing battles. They were losing these battles. And so someone had the idea, we are going to take the Ark of the Covenant into battle with us. The presence of the Lord is going to be there in the battle. And so they took the Ark of the Covenant and they went marching into battle against the Philistines, thinking for sure that if God's presence was there in the form of the Ark, that they were going to win the battle. And they were wrong. We know they lost that battle. The Ark got taken by the Philistines. The Philistines took it into their home country, and they set the Ark down in front of their god Dagon in the temple there, their temple to their god. And we know the story, how Dagon kept falling on his face and breaking, and they were having all kinds of trouble. So they picked up that ark and they moved it to another Philistine city. And I think God struck them with some type of plague. They were breaking out in disease. And so the Philistines had a lot of trouble with the ark of God in their country. And so they're moving it from city to city. And finally, the lords of the Philistines come together and they say, you know what? This ark's got to go. We got to send it back. So they have a cart there, they hook 2 cows to it, they drop the Ark of the Covenant on the cart, they point it in the direction of Israel, and off the cart goes. And there it went. So there's a number of things that happen in between there, but eventually this Ark gets to Abinadab's house, and there it stays for some period of time. The account we're getting ready to read here in 2 Samuel 6 is the account of David now bringing the Ark of God back to Jerusalem, back to the center of Jewish culture. It is a time of celebration for the Jewish people. We're finally bringing the Ark of the Covenant home, God's presence. So I'll read chapter 6, verses 1 through 7 at this time. Again, David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baal of Judah, to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, that dwelleth between the cherubims. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart, and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, that was in Gibeah. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drave the new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was at Gibeah, accompanying the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel played before the Lord on all manner of instruments made of fir wood, even on harps and on psalteries and on timbrels and on cornets and on cymbals. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error, and there he died by the ark of God. I'll leave off reading there. And so here we see this account, this great day of celebration for the Jewish people. They're there. David calls 30,000 of his chosen men there, men of war, to this event. I think there were many, many other people included. And so this was a huge event for the children of Israel. It was a huge event. And so they bring out all their instruments, and they're playing their instruments. They make a new cart to load this Ark of the Covenant on. It wasn't a cart that had been defiled by ordinary use. It wasn't a cart that had been used to take the animal dung out to the field. This was a new cart. It was a special cart for this occasion. And so they get everything ready. They bring the Ark of the Covenant out of Abinadab's house. They place it on this cart. They hook the oxen up, and they start this journey to Jerusalem. And this whole entourage is probably following after, and they're playing their harps and, what does it say? Not harps. It says, all manner of instruments of fir wood, even on harps and on psalteries and on timbrels and on cornets and on cymbals. There was a massive celebration going on. And so they're traveling along. And eventually, they get to Nachon's threshing floor. And we don't know exactly, we aren't given all the details. Ahio, one of Abinadab's sons, was, I guess, leading the oxen. He was walking ahead. And Uzzah was walking alongside, just making sure, I guess, everything went okay. And they got to Nachon's threshing floor, and whether there was a pothole in the road, whether there was a tree root, or we don't know. But the oxen stumble. And when the oxen stumble, the cart shook. As the cart shook, the ark shook, and so there stands Uzzah. He sees this thing starting to sway. And he's probably not even thinking. He wasn't even processing what was going on, but it was almost instinctive. He reached out and he tried to stop that ark from falling, and that fast, God struck him dead. There he lay. That quickly. Nobody set out that day to have Uzzah killed. You know, it wasn't David setting Uriah to the front of the battle. That's premeditated murder. Let's have him killed. No. This was a celebration that was going on. It was a great idea to transport this Ark of the God on a cart. Things were going well. Nobody saw it coming until the moment that God struck Uzzah dead. It made everybody stop. The procession stopped. They stopped moving the ark. Everything stopped. Didn't anyone speak up and question why they were doing this? You know, maybe somebody got the idea that the ark was returned from the Philistines on a cart. Let's go ahead and make a cart ourselves. Where did this idea come from? What were they thinking? They obviously had to lift the ark onto the cart, so they probably used the staves at that point. What went wrong? How did they get to this point? How did we get to the point where we're at today? You know, the ox cart isn't an inherently bad piece of technology. When Angie and I were there in Burkina Faso, we saw these ox carts, these donkey carts, being used all the time. They did farming there, and you would see these carts being used for many good purposes. And yet in this case, the Ark of God, moving the Ark of God, it was the incorrect use of this technology. Someone made a decision. Maybe they thought it was more special to move it in a cart. Maybe they thought it was more efficient. We don't know what the reasoning was. Made a decision to do this. And it had a major impact. Uzzah died. It affected his family. It affected the people around him. It had a large effect, an impact. It's very unlikely they would have chosen to move the Ark of God in this manner had they known the outcome of the day. What? We'll just carry it then, right? If they had seen it coming, if they had that foresight to know what was going to happen, they probably would have done things differently. Today, we need to make decisions on technology, ones that impact our families, ones that impact our church, those around us. We need to make these decisions. And when thinking specifically about technology like YouTube, all this communication sharing, it can be used for many good purposes. One is live streaming. I'm assuming I'm probably being live streamed tonight. I don't know, but I'm going to guess I am. I'm probably being recorded. It's going other places. It's a good thing. Somebody wants to listen to the service. I can tune into many different solid Anabaptist churches and listen to a service I may have missed. There's wholesome, God-honoring music on YouTube. YouTube can be very educational. I don't know about you, but if you have to fix something, it can come in very handy. How do you take this thing apart? I don't know. So you watch a YouTube video and some poor soul somewhere has had the same problem you have, right? It's the way it goes. It can be very educational. You can look at product reviews. If you have a big purchase coming up, you can kind of get a feel for whether people like it or don't like it, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. It can be an effective way of sharing the gospel message. You know, the verbal with the visual is a powerful way to share the gospel message. And yet we can clearly see how YouTube, other streaming services and things like that can be used incorrectly, can be used in an incorrect manner. So I'd like to think a little bit about the effects of YouTube on the church. You know, there's no way in an evening like this that we can cover all the ways that YouTube is affecting us. You can't. It's just so integrated into what we do. And what I mean by that is probably almost everyone here has a smartphone. Every smartphone is probably connected to the internet somehow. It's almost a part of our daily lives. To think about how church would be like, how society would be like, had the World Wide Web not been developed, had the smartphone not been invented, where there was no computers or anything like that, it's hard to even process what things would look like. How would we go about life? We use these things almost every day in the way we communicate. And so they are affecting us. We use them, they're affecting us. And each one of us are church members. And so the way this affects us is the way it is affecting the church. The way it affects us is the way it affects the church. And so this evening, the goal is not to try to cover every possible area that YouTube's affecting us, but maybe focus on a few key areas. And really, the goal this evening is to begin to think seriously about how things like YouTube are affecting us. Because if we can't begin to process, if we can't see down the road, we're in for a potentially scary ride. We need to be looking ahead. We cannot just maybe make the decisions on the mediocre. We got to make the decisions on what's good and best. Is it driving us towards our goal of becoming like Christ? And so the first area I want to talk about is in the area of stewardship. There are many times in the gospel accounts that Jesus talks about being a steward, or talks about stewards or servants being responsible for another's goods, and their master's goods. And one of the most familiar accounts is there in Matthew 25, where Jesus tells the parable of a ruler. He's going into a far country, and so he hands out money to some of his servants. To one servant he gives 5 talents, to one servant he gives 2, and another 1. He goes off, he takes his journey, he's away for a while, and we know that the 2 servants that were given the 5 talents and the 2 talents go out and they trade, they make good use of the money they've been given. And so it accrues in value, and by the time their Lord returns, it has doubled in value. The servant that had 5 now has 10, the servant that had 2 has 4, but the servant that was only given 1 talent, he goes, he wraps that little bit of money in a napkin, he buries it in the ground, and that's where he leaves it. And so when the ruler comes back, we know that he blesses the first 2 servants. They were faithful stewards, they made good investments, they doubled his resources there, and so he blesses them for that. But for the steward that went ahead and he dug a hole in the ground and just kept it for safekeeping, he calls that person a wicked and a slothful servant. His talent was taken from him and given to the servant with 10, and he was thrown into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. This idea of utter separation from God. And so stewardship is important. We understand that. So how are we stewards today? Well, we're stewards of the time that we've been given. I meet very few people that say they just have too much time. I have no idea what to do with all the time I have. I just sitting here bored. I don't meet too many people like that. Most people are like, man, I just don't have enough time. I'm not reaching around. Things aren't pulling together here. Very few people claim they have too much time. And there are some people that may decline teaching Sunday school, sharing a devotional, because, well, I simply don't have time. I just don't have time to do it. Yet, how well do we truly manage our time? We spend a lot of time with technology. And if we're not careful, we can spend more time with technology, more time on things like YouTube, streaming services and things like that, than we would like to admit. We know that YouTube uses carefully constructed algorithms in the background that is watching what you're doing. So it takes into account the searches that you've made, the videos that you've watched, a bunch of other things. It takes into account what people in your local area are doing, and it boils all that through an equation to come out and say, you know what? Most likely, Michael would be interested in this right here, right? And it pops it up in this feed on the right-hand side of the page. And so it's designed to draw you in and keep you on the website longer. It suggests videos that should interest you based on what you've done previously. And so it's tracking you. They're using cookies and things online to track what you do. Now, the average person in the United States spends almost 50 minutes on YouTube each day. And like I said, some of this could be good and productive. You could argue that. People could be watching a church service. I use YouTube sometimes for work. I have to figure something out, or maybe I'm researching a piece of machinery for Conestoga. I want to know how it works. Many machine manufacturers will upload videos of their machines operating onto platforms like YouTube. So it can be good and productive things that can be done. And yet, some of this time can be wasted. How many of you have spent one consecutive hour watching video clips, or surfing the internet over the past month, looking at things that interest you? Sports, hobbies, latest trends in home decoration, Pinterest, I don't know. You fill in the blank. I don't know what that is for you. How many of you have spent one consecutive hour talking to someone face-to-face in the last month? 1 hour is a long time. I don't know if you ever had a conversation, 1 hour, face-to-face in a conversation. It's a long conversation. How many of you have spent one consecutive hour talking to God over the past month? You know, we pull into the church, we run through the church doors, we slide into a pew, we open the hymnal and we sing, "Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer." And we sing it like we mean it. We sing it like with gusto. Do we mean it? Now, I realize the songwriter probably, you could say, well, was he referring to an hour as a specific hour of time, or was he referring to just time in general, that time we spend alone with God? But the point still remains. The point still remains. How much time are we spending in prayer? If you're like me, I can quickly spend more time with technology, YouTube, whatever it may be, than I do with people or alone with God. It can be very subtle. It can be very quick. Now, when people come face to face with death, what is important in life becomes strangely clear, even though it was hard to see as they lived their life. So envision that you find out that you have cancer, and you have a very aggressive form of cancer. Your cancer doctor says, you know what, you have probably less than 2 weeks to live. So if you're sitting in those shoes, standing in those shoes, and you hear that from your cancer doctor, how would you live the last 2 weeks of your life? Would you spend it differently than had you not known that? And if so, why? If I did not know, if I knew I had an end date in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to have a car accident, whatever it may be, would I spend my time differently than if I had not known that piece of information? What percentage of the time would you spend interacting with technology, watching YouTube, things like that? What percentage of the time would you spend on relationships? Or vertical with God, or horizontal with other people? You know, in reality, we aren't guaranteed another breath. We're not guaranteed another moment of time. And yet so many times we go through life presuming on the future. It's just going to continue the way it is. It's going to continue the way it is. It's going to keep rolling along. Things aren't going to change. And yet things can change so suddenly. Lamentations 3:22-23. It is of the Lord's mercies that we're not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They're new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. God is sustaining us. He's upholding us. We're kept by him. He gives us life and breath. And so we're a steward of the time that God has given to us. Now, you may be sitting there and you're listening to this and you said, well, I disagree. I'll disagree. I can be more productive. I can be more efficient because of the time I spend on YouTube. Okay, if I need to do something, it's faster for me to watch a YouTube clip and get something done than for me to do it any other way. However, just because something is more efficient doesn't always mean it's better. And maybe here's an example that's based on a small way, something I encountered. Envision that you bought a used vehicle. Okay, so it's new for you, it's a used vehicle. You go out and you buy this vehicle, and you're driving it for 2 weeks and the headlight bulb goes out. So what do? You pop the hood, you look under the hood, and you say, okay, I'm going to fix this headlight bulb. And guess what you see? It's jam-packed with all kinds of stuff. Plastic guards and shrouds and everything. You can't even see the back of the headlight housing. What are you going to do? Well, what most people would probably do today, what I did in this situation, is I consulted YouTube. I looked up the make and model of the vehicle, changed the headlight bulb, and yep, there was a poor soul that had the same problem I had. So I look into this, and this person goes through all the details of how to do this. He even gives me a little trick where I can take down the wheel well, take a few bolts up and stretch my arm and scuff my knuckles and get up in there, and I can get to the back of the headlight housing and change that bulb. He even gives me the make and model of the bulb. So I'm good. You go and maybe you look it up online, buy it off of Amazon, 2 days it's here, you go ahead, you fix it, and you're on the road again. That was almost painless, except for maybe the scuffed knuckles, I don't know. But you got through it with very little pain. But let's just rewind and replay that again, assuming that we decide not to consult YouTube. What would you do? Well, I was thinking about what would I do, and I think I would go to my local auto parts store. That would be the first place I would start. So let's assume that's what you did. You walk into AutoZone, and there behind the counter is your typical millennial that works at an auto parts store. You know, maybe a little rough around the edges. Not trying to draw stereotypes, but it's your auto parts store worker. And so you dialogue with this person, and you tell them you have XYZ vehicle, and I need to change the headlight bulb. So he tells you how to do that. He gives you the bulb that you need. Hopefully it's right. And you go ahead, and as you're conversing with him, you realize that while he is a tough guy on the outside, he looks really tough. He's actually a really hurting individual. 3 months ago, his mother passed away, and he's still reeling from that. He's struggling with that. And so maybe you're able to plant the gospel seed there. Maybe you're able to give him a word of encouragement. I don't know, something. You bless him, you pick up that bulb, you walk out the door, you go home, and you change your light bulb, your headlight. Was this second run through the story, a lack of stewardship? I don't think we would say yes, it's a lack of stewardship. It's no. There are some things that are important in life that we don't always see, and how God is orchestrating the events in our lives. We need to remember that we have such a limited perspective on life. God sees the bigger picture, and he's orchestrating the events in our lives for the furtherance of his kingdom. And so we're a steward over time. And I realized the way that story played out for me was I did do the YouTube route, right? I went and changed it. But in thinking and processing through and laying out the sermon, thinking through that, it's like I missed an opportunity. You see, because YouTube and any type of interaction with the internet and things is usually one-way communication. We're receiving, we're never giving. And so utilizing technology like that takes away our opportunity to build relationships, to give to other people. We're also a steward of our finances and wealth. Why was YouTube created? Well, it was created to create and share home video footage. And yet, like most businesses, most business owners, entrepreneurs, I'm very certain that the creators of YouTube had the full intention that this website would eventually generate a profit, would turn a profit sometime. And it's a very profitable company today. In 2023, it generated $31.5 billion in revenue. And some of the most successful YouTube creators are making like $100 million. It's a phenomenal amount of money that some of these creators make. And yet we realize that YouTube generates a lot of its income on advertising. So there's a reason why there's an advertisement at the beginning, and sometimes in the middle, and sometimes at the end, and scattered throughout. And so I asked a coworker of mine, I said, how is YouTube affecting you? He said, oh, it's affecting my purchasing decisions. Which I thought, most times when I think of advertising and things, well, that doesn't really affect me. And yet I think sometimes it's a little more subtle than we realize. We're getting bombarded with all these advertisements, watching product reviews, whatever on YouTube, can quickly breed a materialistic mindset and a level of discontent. And yet, compared to many others in the world, we are extremely blessed. If we look at basically half the world's population is living on less than $5.50 a day. And so we're extremely blessed. Are we truly being good stewards of the wealth that God has entrusted to us? So many times you might see an advertisement. You may not go out and purchase that thing right away, but it plants a seed. Weeks go by, months go by, and maybe you find a good deal on it, or something comes up, or something, and you might end up purchasing something similar to that, or whatever. It planted a seed that eventually led to an action sometime later. 1 John 3:17, but whoso hath this world's goods, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? And so the question we have to ask ourselves, are we squandering the resources God has given or entrusted to us, or are we using it for the furtherance of his kingdom? Are we building his kingdom? Are we pushing the kingdom of heaven forward? We are stewards of the wealth that God has entrusted to us, and we will be held accountable for that. And so YouTube is affecting our stewardship, our time, our money. We could add other things in there. It's also affecting our relationships. This is area number 2 we would like to look at here tonight. We already discussed time. We obviously know that relationships take time. You can't build a relationship without investing time into it. And we realize that YouTube can be a big time waster. It takes time away that we should be spending engaged with our family. I encourage young families, parents, to be engaged with their children when they're at home. Okay? It can be so easy to be on the phone or trying to take care of something. I remember one time we were trying to order Christmas pictures. This wasn't on YouTube, but you get the idea. And so my wife and I were engaged in trying to figure out how do we lay out the Christmas card and what this should look like and what picture to use and all of these decisions of what the Christmas card looked like. Well, the children kind of got antsy. None of us were paying attention to them. We were focused at trying to figure this out, solve the thing, and move on. The same thing can happen in daily life. That's just one example where we get pulled off course or we get focused on, Christmas pictures are important, but we get focused on things that maybe are a lesser value. YouTube affects our relationships in that it polarizes us. When Jesus was on trial before Pilate, Pilate asked the question, what is truth? What is truth? And so as the amount of information grows, things happen, it's hard to determine what is truth. And I stated before that YouTube uses an algorithm. It's tracking what you're doing, and it's giving you content that should align with your interests. But if you play that card out long enough, and I'm only receiving things and getting suggestions that align with my own point of view or interests, it can lead to polarization. So maybe an example is, I have a Simplicity lawn tractor at home. That's what I use to mow my lawn. And let's say I consult YouTube on how to winterize it. So I service the engine, I change the filters, take care of everything, and I get that done. And YouTube picks up on that I looked up a Simplicity lawn tractor of this model, and so it suggests videos of Simplicity lawn tractors. And maybe I click on one or two of them or something, and I see these happy homeowners nicely mowing their lawn with a Simplicity lawn tractor. And I'm led to believe that Simplicity is the best lawn tractor there is. Why would anyone want to own another lawn tractor outside of the Simplicity? And my neighbor, right next door, he has a beautiful green and yellow John Deere. He does the exact same thing. He wants to winterize his tractor, goes to YouTube, types it in, up comes a guy that winterized his tractor some time ago and steps you through all the filters and things you need. And so he does the same thing, and YouTube does the same thing for him. It gives him suggestions on John Deere tractors. And so he watches a few of them, and he sees a comparison between John Deere and Kubota, and comes out that, John Deere is absolutely the best. Why would anybody want to ride a Kubota? Or okay. So he walks away, and he's thinking, why would anyone want to buy another mower other than a John Deere? Okay. We had two people, me and my neighbor. We both went to the same source for information, YouTube, and we came back with two different answers. Okay, that's harmless, right? What color your lawn tractor, well, maybe some people think it's important, but it really is a harmless subject in the end, right? But there are topics that can divide us, and I think we need to be aware of that. You look back at COVID, there were churches that split over some things. Sad, very sad. We look at the political landscape, it's just become more and more polarized. People are going, and it's partly because of this. Not just YouTube, but search engines in general are creating this. They're feeding people what they want to hear, things that align with their interest. Another area is fellowship. Fellowship and brotherhood are key elements of church life. We encourage each other on to a closer walk with Christ. We carry one another's burdens. And with the advent of church live streams, like the one that's going on tonight, it gives the opportunity for somebody that's not here to actually listen into this service. They might be able to go back and listen to it 2 or 3 months from now. Somebody not from Myerstown could go see this service. And so what it opens up the door for is for people to get a taste of good spiritual teaching without ever walking through the doors of a church. Now you may say, well, that's wonderful. But in light of that, the temptation can arise around this type of year. We'll use that for an example. When hunting season is going on, I'm running to the cabin. We're going to go try to shoot a deer, right? And you know what? It would just be easier if we just stayed here for the whole weekend. We'll stay through Sunday. And so we stay at the cabin through Sunday. We have Wi-Fi at the cabin. We can link into the church service. I can watch it. And it's wonderful. I feel like I'm a part of the church service. I was spiritually fed through that event. And while that may seem harmless, we're missing some of the most important aspects of church life, and that's gathering together like this. Hebrews 10:24-25, and let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. YouTube can have an effect on our fellowship. And so let's keep in mind, it's not like I'm saying we are in this spot or this is happening, but let's keep that in mind. Let's keep that in focus from the standpoint of let's be on guard. A third area I'd like to briefly touch on very quickly here is that of thinking and mental health. I've heard a lot about the topic of mental health recently. A few months ago, I received an email from a doctor at Tower Health, that's the local hospital there in Reading, asking if our ministry team wanted to come to a seminar on mental health. The mental health cases in our area are going up. And that's true in general society in the U.S. 19.1% of the U.S. population has an anxiety disorder. 1/3 of the U.S. population reported anxiety symptoms in 2023. And young adults are the ones that are most likely to struggle with anxiety. Now, those that are involved in school, I don't know if that aligns with what you're seeing, if anxiety is on the rise in young people, but I find that very interesting. Could this potentially be affecting the church as well? Or are we somehow immune to this, what's going on? We see all this turmoil going on in our world. The war between Russia and Ukraine, or between Hamas and Israel, or the political situation in our country, or the economy, or you name anything there. Just constant turmoil. We worry about our health. We worry about all kinds of things. There's a big difference between knowledge and wisdom. I'll just briefly touch on this point. You can go to YouTube, you can go to these other sources, and you can become knowledgeable on a subject. You can. Whether it's health-related, whether it's current events, whatever, you could become knowledgeable on that. But that does not mean you have wisdom. Wisdom is using that knowledge correctly. And so I wonder sometimes if that's the reason why there is an uptick, or this is most pronounced, in the younger generation. They haven't lived as long. They don't know how to process this influx of information coming at them, and they can't process it, while older individuals have seen more of life. COVID came around, and some of the older folks that were supposedly the most vulnerable, get me out of the house, I want to go. I could care less, right? They didn't want to sit around. And so we had this dynamic here where people that have processed life longer can process all this information better. Isaiah 26:3, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee because he trusteth in thee. So where are we placing our trust? Is our mind stayed on Jesus? I'd like to end very quickly here on remaining faithful. So what does this look like moving forward? One place to start is to keep our focus and trust in the right place. Prayer and Bible reading are a good start. Instead of taking those few minutes to watch a clip on YouTube, catch up on the news, take that time to read God's Word. Spend extra time in prayer. Spiritual giants like George Mueller had 24 hours in the day as well. We're no different than these people in the past. It's how are we prioritizing our time? You may have heard the phrase, you become what you eat. If I eat junk food, I'm going to look like I ate junk food, right? If I eat healthy, I'm going to hopefully look healthier. It's the same way with our spiritual health. If we consume junk, we're going to have a problem with our spiritual health. If we stay focused on Christ, if our mind is stayed on Him, we will be healthy spiritually. Second area we need to focus on is brotherhood in the church. We need to make that a priority. As much as this sometimes it wants to pull us apart, the ability to just communicate so freely, we need each other. We need in-person relationships. It's so important. We need the input of our brotherhood because I can't see everything. You as individuals can see what's behind my back spiritually, so to speak. You see things that I can't see in my own life, and so I need you. You need each other. Discipleship groups, accountability groups are good methods of strengthening the brotherhood. And we need godly wisdom. We need to be praying for godly wisdom. James 1:5, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Technology is going to continue to change. We're not going to somehow jump off the bandwagon here and live as a hermit for the rest of time. It's not going to happen. And so this stuff's going to evolve. And unless God maybe reaches down and maybe creates this massive solar storm or something that fries all the, servers around the world and things come to a screeching halt, things are just going to keep progressing faster because the communication is open. Like we go back to the Tower of Babel and the way they were able to come together and build. The more we can communicate things and people learn what other people are doing, they can innovate faster. Things are going to keep changing faster. AI is going to become a reality. It is a reality, right? It's going to become more of a reality as we go forward. How are we going to deal with it? What is it going to look like? What safeguards do we need to put in place? While technology like YouTube, the World Wide Web, is not inherently right or wrong, it can be dangerous depending on the way it's used. And so my question is, was Uzzah's life worth trying to transport the Ark of God on a cart? Was it worth it? Was that a mediocre decision or the best decision? Or where in that continuum was it? We need to make these choices. We need to be thinking down the road. So in conclusion, may we as a church of Jesus Christ today be found faithful in the generation we're called to live. We're called for such a time as this. We're here. God has a purpose for us. There's a reason we're here. Let us be faithful in that. As Hebrews 12:1 states, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Sorry I went a little over time there. I was trying to keep it moving, but it was a longer sermon. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. I thank you for coming out this evening. I realize the children are probably getting tired of sitting and things, so I appreciate you staying with me. Let's all stand, and we'll have a benediction.